Reading with your kids.
Oh my goodness, you are looking wonderful today. Come on in. I love seeing that smile. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and iTunes #1 kids and family podcast. We are so thankful for your support. Thank you for subscribing to the show on iTunes or whatever podcasting platform you're listening to us on. And if you haven't subscribed already, why don't you do it right now? We have great guests like the guest we have on today. Her name is Kathy MacMillian, and she is here to tell us about Dagger and Coin. Hey, for all the authors that are listening out there, I wanted to share with you this great email that we received here at the Reading with Your Kids podcast from Dr. Linda Mubarak. She is a past guest and the author of Maxine's New Job. Here's the email. Dear Fatima and Jed, good news! Maxine's New Job has been nominated to receive the prestigious Henri Award at the 2018 Christian Literacy Awards for Outstanding Literacy Work in the Children's Book Division. I sincerely believe your certifying Maxine as a great read helped bring increased social media attention to the book. Thank you for the exposure and the great marketing. We are so happy for Dr. Linda Mubarak that her book, Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read, Maxine's New Job, received this prestigious recognition. We would love to help your book receive that same kind of recognition. If you are interested in having your book considered for our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program, please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can click on the contact button, send us a note, and we'll send all the information back to you, or you can go right to our Certified Great Read page on our website. It's fun, it's easy, and it is really an effective way to let the world know that your book stands out above all the rest. The Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program. Joining us on the line right now from right outside of Baltimore in Maryland in Owens Mills. She's been a guest on the show in the past. Is really, you talk about both ends of the spectrum. Earlier, she was talking to us about a really cool picture book called Nita's First Signs. Today, she's talking about a YA fantasy title that she wrote called Dagger and Coin. Please welcome back to the show, Kathy MacMillian. Kathy, how are you?
I'm great. I'm really glad to be here.
Excellent to have you back. Before we ask you exactly what Dagger and Coin is all about, I have to ask you that you're writing at both ends of the spectrum there. What's that like, and is it easy to kind of switch from one mode to the other?
It's different. I actually write a whole bunch of different things. I also, right now, I'm working on a middle grade fantasy series and also a nonfiction picture book. And I also have several nonfiction books for adults out as well. So, yeah.
Wow.
Lots of things.
Very cool. Do you find, and this is just kind of the author in me, and we do have a lot of authors out there listening, do you have to get yourself in a whole different mindset when you write for the different audiences, or is it you just and do you kind of set out, well, I have this story and it's best for this audience, or you just kind of find a story and you start writing and you think, well, I should write make this book for this audience and that audience? And
it's a little bit of everything, and it's kind of funny because getting a book published takes so long that while you're waiting in the 10-year process to get your debut novel published, for example, you may end up working on lots of other things, and you may find yourself kind of doing those things while you're waiting. While you're waiting to hear back from your agent or hear back about the novel. And so that's kind of what happened with me. I published my first nonfiction book the same year that I started submitting my first novel to agents, and was able to find somebody to publish my first nonfiction book, which was a resource book for librarians, pretty quickly. And in the time I was working on the novel with my agent, I published about 5 or 6 nonfiction books, because it took 10 years to get that first novel published.
Wow.
Dagger and Coin is the sequel to that novel. The first novel, Sword and Verse, came out in 2016, and Dagger and Coin is the sequel, which comes out October 9th, 2018.
Wow, so cool. So you're an overnight sensation.
That took 10 years, at least.
So tell us about Dagger and Coin.
Well, Dagger and Coin is set in the same world as my book, Sword and Verse. Sword and Verse is the story of a society where only the nobility are allowed to read and write. And the main character of that book is a slave girl who gets caught up in a linguistic mystery and a forbidden romance and a revolution. And Dagger and Coin is the story of what happens after the revolution. And part of the reason I was really excited to write this story was because so often in fantasy novels we see the story of tearing down the unjust society, and that's great, but what happens next? So while Sword and Verse is about upending an unjust society, Dagger and Coin is about the hard work of setting up something better in its place. And it is from the point of view of a different main character, probably the main character who lost the most in Sword and Verse, and who was kind of the rival of Reza, the main character in Sword and Verse. It's about a girl named Soraya Gamo, and she's 19 years old. She was the fiance of the king. She lost all of her political, what do I want to say? Not political ambitions. She definitely still has her ambitions, but she lost all her chances basically through what happened in Sword and Verse. And she gets the chance to be a part of this new government that is forming. And in doing so, she has to confront her own privilege and her own prejudices, and she has to overcome a lot in herself and decide if she really wants to be a part of making this new society work. And in doing so, she gets to face a lot of entrenched classism and sexism, and it's very, very political, very full of adventure, lots of romance. It's a fun story.
Yeah. And it's, I know it's a fantasy and it's set in this universe that you created, but boy, it kind of has its toes in reality when you kind of think about it, and we hear, there's a lot of folks who are complaining and rightly so that, things are unjust and we need to change, and people are demanding change, but they don't always have what that change should be. It's just, we don't like what's going on right now, and we need some change. We need things to change. And it's, okay, how?
Yeah. And one of the things I really love about this book is it let me showcase Soraya, who is very much a strong female character and not easy to like. In fact, we just got the first trade review from Kirkus yesterday, and they said something like that she's arrogant and hard to like, but her ferocious intelligence, and they said a couple other things. I can't quote the exact review, but they command respect and make her sympathetic. And that's really what I wanted to show that. And in fact, at one point, Soraya even says it's a lot harder to be respected than it is to be liked when you're a woman, especially if you're a woman who's ambitious.
That's interesting. I think it's something that my very strong, and skillful young daughter would agree with that. Even in this real world that we're living in, it's very difficult. It's harder for a young woman or a woman of any age to be respected, and it's easier for them to be liked.
Definitely. And then another piece that probably has a lot of me in it. I'm very type A. I have spreadsheets. My spreadsheets have spreadsheets. So Soraya's story is very much the story of a policy wonk manager. She is the one who, at one point I was talking to one of my critique partners about the two main characters of Sword and Verse and of Dagger and Coin. And she said that Reza, the main character of Sword and Verse, is the one who's going to make sure that people are inspired and have temples. And Soraya is the one who's going to make sure they have a clean place to go to the bathroom and food to eat. And we need both of those in this world.
Absolutely. It's, it's funny. I think I'm probably the opposite type. I'm the person with a lot of ideas, and I remember having a conversation early on with someone, and I said, I want to do this, and this is what I'm thinking of, and wouldn't this be great? And that person sat down and said, well, where are people going to go to the bathroom? And what? He goes, well, if you're going to have all these people, all these things, where are they going to go to the bathroom? And I hadn't even thought of that, and I don't want to think of that.
But we need people who think of
We
that.
absolutely need people to think of that, because I've been to a concert where there was no place to go to the bathroom.
See? Yeah.
How much fun do you have creating these fantasy worlds?
Oh, a lot of fun. I do, as you can imagine, from a person whose spreadsheets have spreadsheets.
Uh-huh.
I have a spreadsheet that has all of the details of my fictional world. I could pull up, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I have that information, what the average rainfall in the southern desert is, and the different countries and the different pieces that go into it. And it all sort of stemmed from this one idea that I had. It would have been about 2004, 2003 when I actually wrote the first version of Sword and Verse, which was the first book. I was doing research on ancient libraries and book burning, and I came across a mention of libraries that were composed entirely of letters. And in the margin of my notes, I wrote, what if they were letters to the gods? And then that just kind of set off this thinking, like, well, what if you had a society that had this sacred library full of letters to the gods? Who's allowed to write those letters? Mm-hmm. What language would they be written in? Would it be the same as the everyday language, or would it be different? And who's allowed to write that language? And what happens if somebody who's not allowed to write that language writes in that language? And how would that language be passed on? And so it all kind of spun out of that, and the mythology kind of came from there. The mythology of this world came in very quickly, and it's almost a sort of Prometheus story, whereas instead of fire, it's writing. Uh-huh. Writing is the gift of the gods. And that inspired everything else about the world, and how the society was constructed, how the mythology, how the religion was constructed, how the oppression based on the religion was constructed. And all of those things sort of came together. And then now that, this unjust society has been upended and writing is now being spread throughout the population. Of course, there's some people who are suspicious about writing because their whole life they've, if I were to write, I would die, basically. Mm-hmm. So now you've got this group of people who are trying to set up a new government where everything is more fair and trying to get people educated and get people to write. But you've got these people who are very suspicious of writing. And of course, you're going to have, counter movements and people trying to assert their own ideas into it all. And it's the original working title of Dagger and Coin was Soraya's Mess, because it's a mess. That poor girl has to do with a huge mess, but she does it with aplomb.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating, and I'm just imagining the conversations that families could have if they set out to read this book together, especially in the light of what's going on today and our world around us, and how, it wasn't all that long ago where, people were prohibited from learning and from reading, and, and
in areas of the world they still are.
Yeah, and the word terrifying comes to mind. It's terrifying to think like that. I can't imagine. I'm just sitting here trying to imagine what my life would be like if I were not allowed to learn. If I weren't allowed to go to the library when I was younger and pick up a book, if there are certain books that I wasn't allowed to read, if there were certain ideas that I wasn't allowed to discuss. And I know there are certainly ideas that you can get in trouble for discussing and sharing even now. But yeah, you're right. There are places in this world where Malala, would just, was tortured and almost killed because she dared go to school. So this is happening now. So it's a very relevant title, and I think it's wonderful, and I really encourage families to read this together and start talking about it, because I think talking about fantasy is a good way to start talking about reality.
Absolutely. Just about any fantasy novel, that's true about. When people say, oh, they're made up, they're fantasy, they're not. If you look at, well, not just dystopian science fiction and fantasy, but any fantasy novel is going to have parallels to our world. And it might be that the dragons are technology, or one of my favorite series is the Time series by Megan Morrison. It's Time, Tyme. And it's an upper middle grade, younger YA series that is fairy tale retellings that are just so beautifully done. The first book is Grounded, The Adventures of Rapunzel. The second is Disenchanted, The Trials of Cinderella. And Disenchanted, The Trials of Cinderella, it's a Cinderella story, but it's also about fair labor laws. And she really works in these big real world issues so beautifully.
Yeah. And this is a great, I really think, books, we just talk about it. Books are such an important tool for family. They're great tools for families, for parents to share their values with their kids, because no kid wants to be lectured to. But it's great to share a story with one another and to talk about that story. One of the things, though, it's one of the things that I talk to parents about, and I always remind them that if they, and I think this is a book where this absolutely, if you're talking about Dagger and Coin, and you ask your kids, what do you think about what's going on in the story? You need to be prepared to hear something that you don't agree with or that you don't like, and you need to remember that you asked your child for their opinion and that their opinion's okay. You might not agree with it, but it's their opinion, and it's okay for them to have it.
Absolutely. And Soraya makes some controversial choices in this book. I'm not going to lie about that. But they are absolutely the choices that she, in her position with her background, would make. And I think that that's important to bring to consideration, too, that everybody has a different perspective. And that's one of the values of reading fiction, is it teaches us empathy. It teaches us to consider how another person with another background might approach a situation and think that, it's not all about me and my perspective of the world. There's lots of different approaches to this situation.
Yeah. It's funny. You just mentioned that I was just teaching a magic class, teaching little 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, teaching them magic, which in and of itself is really kind of a useless proposition. And we're talking about perspective and how something can look different from a different angle, and I made a cup levitate in the air, and from the right angle it looks incredibly magical and it looks amazing, and all I have to do is to shift my body about 25 degrees, and all of a sudden it ain't so magical at all. And it's kind of really, I feel kind of gypped now. But I think that that's an important lesson for everybody to know, because we really do come from even here in the United States, and even here in the Northeast, we look at things in a very different way than people from the Southeast or from the Midwest or from the West. And certainly then when you're talking about people from different countries, that's a whole other ballgame.
Absolutely. So when the last time I was on your podcast, I was talking about Nita's First Signs in American Sign Language. And as we discussed then, my day job is that I'm an American Sign Language interpreter. And one of my favorite things when I do workshops with, I do a lot of workshops with librarians in particular, since that's my background, on basic signs for the library and that sort of thing. But one of my favorite things is to talk about deaf culture as opposed to hearing culture. And we talk about some of the differences in how you get attention, in what's considered polite. And one of the things that people are always surprised to know is that if you see two deaf people signing, or two people signing, and you need to get through them, you can just walk right through. You don't have to stop and say, excuse me, and make them interrupt their conversation. You just go right through. And to hearing people, that just feels so rude. But from a deaf culture perspective, if you have to take your eyes off of the person you're signing with and look at the person who's saying, excuse me, you've totally interrupted the conversation and it's completely rude. And one of the things I love about that example is I usually use it as kind of a quiz question later in the workshop or the class, after they've already learned about deaf culture and they already know the importance of eye contact and so forth. And still, all the hearing people say, I should tap them on the shoulder and wait till they look at me and say, excuse me, because we are so led by our own internal cultural values, and we don't tend to remember that they are cultural, that they are not universal. It's a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I remember when we first started hosting international kids, we had, it was a very unusual situation because this young lady who was coming to live with us, her dad was with her, which never happens. Mm-hmm. And so he was coming down, and she was very young. She was very nervous, and we're trying to be very polite and friendly and open. So we're all smiles, and the father actually didn't speak English. The young woman did, and the one thing she said is, "My dad just says Americans smile too much," and sorry, but that was like, oh yeah, we come from different cultures, and this means something different, and wow, and again, such a valuable lesson for kids to understand, and what in Dagger and Coin. And we're talking about different perspectives. Is there a way, as an author, as a parent yourself, that you would suggest we help our kids understand the fact that we do come from different perspectives, and just because this is my perspective, it doesn't mean that this is the right perspective. It might be right for me. Mm-hmm. But how can we help our kids get out of that universe? This is right. If it's right for me, it's right for everyone.
Well, I think part of it is bringing those different perspectives to light, and that's actually one of the reasons I really wanted to write this second book from a different character's perspective, because we then get to see all of these situations, and we get to see the main character of the first book, whose voice we were in for 400 pages. We get to see her from the perspective of somebody who doesn't like her all that much, well, let's put it this way, who doesn't want to like her all that much, but is forced to see her point of view and comes around. So I think that can be really valuable. Any kinds of, particularly books where we're kind of shown the dramatic irony. The book that popped into my mind, especially with younger children, that would be really valuable for talking about this is a book called, it's by Victoria Coe, and the title is Fenway and Hattie, and it's written from the point of view of a Jack Russell Terrier. Oh. And so, it's very clear what's going on. When he talks about food lady, he means the mom in the family is the one who feeds him, or when he talks about, I can't remember what he calls it, but the evil slidey kitchen floor that he can't walk on, and that the evil squirrels, it's a conspiracy. They're against us. So you're very much seeing his perspective, but because kids know what the dog is and, and how he's looking at things, it really kind of forces you to kind of take that other point of view. And I think that is valuable for older kids as well. Yeah. And that's why I love writing books from different points of view. And I actually have a lot of extras that are on my website that are different parts of the story from other characters' points of view, which is something I love exploring, because you see the different voices, the different ways different people come at the same problem. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there are surprising things behind it. The things that someone does or says might seem like, why are they doing that? Mm-hmm. But then you find out there's something else behind it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's so valuable. And, we always talk about, reading with our kids is a great way to help them develop empathy for others. And we shouldn't stop when the kids start reading on their own. Because the empathy is I really think empathy is a muscle that you have to just keep working at. And the more you work at it, if that's the strongest muscle in your body, that's pretty cool. And that's going to serve you really well, because empathy can get you an awful long way in this world.
That is very true.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your website. Tell us your website where folks can get all this extra information.
Certainly. It is at KathyMacMillian.com. That's KathyMacMillian. And you can find information about all my books there. I've got lots of extras and extra stories and all kinds of fun stuff.
This is awesome. I can't wait. Now, I just want a little preview, because I can't wait till your next visit to the podcast, because I know there's going to be a next visit, because you're doing all this great writing. Do you have a little preview of what's coming out next from Kathy MacMillian?
So the next one that's coming out will be next spring from Familius Press, and that is a nonfiction picture book called She Spoke, 14 Women Who Raised Their Voices and Changed the World. And I'm very excited about that one, because I'm actually co-authoring it with my best writing buddy, Manuela Bernardi. She's a Brazilian screenwriter, and she and I have been friends and writing partners for about 15 years. And so we finally get to work on a project together. And it's a very cool nonfiction picture book that actually has sound chips embedded in it. So you'll not only get to see and read about these different women, but you'll get to press a button and hear them speaking as well.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait. Familius is great. They're very inventive in finding different ways to use technology in their books, and that's awesome. And we should mention that Dagger and Coin, it's not a Familius title. It is a Harper Teen title.
Correct.
Excellent. Well, check out the website, KathyMacMillian.com. Check out Dagger and Coin and the original book one of the series, Sword and Verse. Hey, Kathy, I've had a blast speaking to you tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Please, please, please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. I am so very excited. Our guest is coming to us from Edinburgh in Scotland by way of Singapore. She is somebody that I've been aware of, I've been a fan of for many, many years, not for her writing, but because she was really a force, a real force in the magic world. And then she gave it up to become a children's author. You are going to be fascinated to meet Ning Chai on the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We want to thank Kathy MacMillian for being here today, and of course, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and as always, thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.